Recently, I came to a disturbing realization that much of my life revolves around comfort. Comfort. Think about this with me. Every morning, I open my eyes laying in a comfortable bed, in a home set to a comfortable temperature. My alarm goes off at a decently comfortable time, and I get in a shower with water at a comfortable temperature. I then put on comfortable clothes and comfortable shoes, brush my teeth with toothpaste that is literally flavored to be enjoyable and comfortable. I get in my truck and set it to a comfortable temperature and drive on comfortable roads to work. I get to work and sit in my comfortable office chair, again with a thermostat set to a comfortable temperature. I drink coffee perfectly brewed to a comfortable taste. I work on a computer with lots of tools to make my job more comfortable. And for lunch, I have endless choices of food that is delicious and comfortable. I could go on, but that's the realization that hit me one day. I live a very comfortable life. Of course, I have some challenges I deal with. There are hard things that go on in my day-to-day. I don't think of myself as being overly pampered. But I've found that when faced between two choices, I am going to almost always pick the most comfortable one. And I'm going to try and avoid discomfort at all costs. So I asked myself this question: what is this love of comfort doing to me? What is it doing to all of us living in a comfortable society? Could surrounding ourselves with so much comfort actually have a damaging effect on our lives? Now look, I don't think having a comfortable bed and taking a warm shower is a bad thing. But here's what I've noticed in my own life. The more comfortably I live, the less I'm able to tolerate discomfort. Little things like getting stuck in traffic, technology not working, receiving some criticism from someone. Those things are uncomfortable and therefore they've become unacceptable. As a result, my comfort zone has become smaller and smaller to where the things I used to find acceptable are now out of the zone. And the walls of my comfort zone are built so high that I'm simply unwilling to do hard things. And I found this has an effect on my physical health, my mental health, my relationships with others, and I think it's had an effect on my spiritual life. I will obey the Lord so long as He doesn't ask me to do anything too uncomfortable. I will follow Jesus wherever He leads so long as the road is smooth and there's good coffee when we get there. I will serve others so long as it doesn't inconvenience me too much. I will get involved in other people's lives so long as it's not too messy. I will give my time so long as it fits in my calendar. I will give my money so long as it fits in my budget. I will go to church so long as the parking in the building is comfortable to my needs. I will worship so long as they play the music I like. I will listen so long as the preacher keeps me interested. I will go to Sunday school so long as the people I like are in my class. I will serve in little kids so long as it's only once a month. And I will keep attending so long as my kids think church is fun. And as soon as they make me uncomfortable, I'll just move on to another church that has more of my comfort needs. And eventually, I'll probably just stop going altogether because, getting up every Sunday morning and getting everybody dressed and out the door, it's just a lot. It's a lot more comfortable to just stay home and watch online and focus on my own personal relationship with God, because then my comfortable God never asks me to do anything that I don't already want to do. This morning, I want to show you what happens when we embrace comfort religion. A religion that is built on what we like, what we're used to, what is traditional and acceptable to us. And I want to show you what Jesus has to say about that. That's what we're going to see in our passage this morning as we continue walking through the Gospel of Luke. Last week, we saw Jesus' first encounter with a group that will become his main opposition in the Gospels. This group was called the Pharisees. They were influential Jewish leaders that prided themselves on being holier than everyone else. They added thousands of man-made laws to God's laws, and they held everyone to this standard that they themselves could not keep. This theme of the Pharisees attacking Jesus is the one we'll see many times in Luke's gospel, including in our story today. So let's walk through our passage, break it all down, and then I want to come in at the end and look at two consequences of having a comfortable religion. So look with me first at Luke chapter 5. Let's start in verses 27 and 28. After this, that's Jesus, went out and saw a tax collector named Levi sitting at the tax booth. And he said to him, "Follow me." And leaving everything, he rose and followed him. Earlier in this chapter, we saw Jesus call his very first disciples, a group of fishermen named Peter and his brother Andrew, along with two other brothers named James and John. And it was a similar situation. Jesus called them to follow, and they left everything behind to follow him. Two things were stunning about that first call, and we see those two things again here. First, the kind of people Jesus called, and second, the response that they gave. Think with me first about the kind of people Jesus called to follow him. If I were Jesus and I had this big plan to save the world and I was going to commission a group to take my message around the globe, I would be looking for the best and the brightest. I would choose some guys who maybe had a lot of resources and connections, some guys with some power and influence over others, maybe like a celebrity or a professional athlete or a billionaire or a CEO. But that's not the kind of people Jesus called. Fishing was not a noble profession. It was hard work, it was dirty work, and it was done at night, which meant these guys had very little influence in society. Fishing was common work, but tax collecting, man, that was considered immoral work. Fishermen, they would have been ignored and overlooked, but tax collectors, they were hated. That's because tax collectors ultimately worked for Rome. The Jewish people in this time, while somewhat free, were still an oppressed people under Roman rule. And they were regularly reminded of this by the tax system. It was one of the ways to keep the Jewish people in check. And what made it especially frustrating was that tax collectors made a living by padding their pockets. If the local tax rate was 10%, they would collect 15% and keep the difference for themselves. So many of the tax collectors, they lived large with nice clothing and nice homes. For a Jewish person to work this job for the enemy, that was to be a major sellout and to be completely rejected by your fellow Jews. And yet this is who Jesus called to follow him when he called Levi. It was not unusual, as we've already seen in the New Testament with Peter, for people to have two names back in this time. We know Levi, he's also called Matthew. He wrote one of the other Gospels. And he was the last person on the planet that a Jewish rabbi, a teacher of the law, would ever have asked to be his disciple. You see, having disciples wasn't a unique thing to Jesus. There were many rabbis or teachers in this time who were godly, smart men. They taught others. And one of the great hopes of a young Jewish man was to become a disciple of a rabbi so that you could learn from him and kind of replicate his ministry and become a rabbi yourself. But if you or I were a rabbi looking to leave a legacy, we would be looking again for the best and the brightest. Someone that would represent us well. We would never pick a tax collector. And if you or I were a tax collector, we would know that we would never be picked by a rabbi. We would have given up that dream long ago for respect and reverence, all to make money. That's what makes the response of Levi so shocking. He had a lot to give up. He had a very comfortable life, and yet he left everything and followed Jesus. This would have shocked Levi. This would have shocked the other disciples. But it angered the Pharisees. And that's what we see next. Look at Luke 5, verses 29 to 30. And Levi made him, Jesus, a great feast in his house. And there was a large company of tax collectors and others reclining at table with them. And the Pharisees and their scribes grumbled at his disciples, saying, "Why do you eat and drink with tax collectors and sinners?" What's the first thing we see that Levi does when he follows Jesus? He throws a party. And he invites all his friends to meet Jesus. What does that simple act tell us about Christ? If you were a messed up, greedy person that all of society hated, including your own family and friends, and somehow you got the chance to turn it all around and redeem yourself and follow this amazing up-and-coming rabbi, don't you think you'd try to fit in? Clean up your act a little bit? Don't you think you'd distance yourself from your old friends and your old life? I mean, this holy rabbi isn't going to want to be around all this riffraff. The righteous Jewish leaders, they don't eat with people like this. That's the opposite of what Levi did. And I don't think it's because he was foolish or ignorant. No, I think it's because he saw who Jesus was. He saw that Jesus called him despite who he was, and he thought, if Jesus could accept me, then he can accept anyone. Levi didn't try to hide the dirt of his life from this perfect man, Jesus. No, he decided to bring all the other dirty people he knew to be made clean like him. He wanted his friends to find what he had found, or rather, what had found him. He wanted his friends to experience grace. That's why we should pray for God to give us a heart like Levi. A heart for our friends, a heart for our family, for our neighbors, that we might bring them to Jesus. God, give us a heart like Levi. He throws a party. He invites all his sinful friends, and then he invites this famed religious leader, Jesus. And somehow, Jesus accepts the invitation and he shows up. We need to understand how radical this would have been. The Jewish leaders of the day, especially the Pharisees, were what we would call separatist. They demonstrated their holiness by separating or staying away from the unholy. They social distanced from sinners. They would never share a meal or enter the home of someone they labeled dirty, lest they become infected themselves. Jesus did the exact opposite. While they moved away, Jesus came close. We saw this when Jesus touched the leper. He's breaking the rules, crossing the lines, upsetting the apple cart, and they don't like it. Thus the question, why do you eat and drink with those people, sinners? Jesus responds by dropping this bomb on them. Look at verses 31 and 32. Jesus answered them, "Those who are well have no need of a physician, but those who are sick. I have not come to call the righteous, but sinners to repentance." Jesus uses here the analogy of a doctor, and this makes logical sense. Generally, doctors are there to help you when you're sick. The question is, who is he talking about? Well, clearly, he's the doctor in the analogy. The sick are the sinful people he's eating with, and the well are the Pharisees. Now, he's not saying that the Pharisees aren't sinners or that they're not in need of God's grace, or even that they're spiritually healthy, and by calling the sinners sick, he's not insulting them. He's actually insulting the Pharisees here. He's saying they think they're healthy when they are sinners too, and because they think they're healthy, they have completely missed their need for Jesus and grace. That's why Jesus is spending time with those who are labeled sinners, the outcast, the low down, because they know they're sinners and therefore they recognize their need for Jesus and grace. In light of that analogy, here's the big statement Jesus makes about his ministry. He says, "I've not come to call the righteous, but sinners to repentance." And don't miss how startling these words are. Jesus says, he's telling us in one sense, he didn't come for everyone. He didn't come to save righteous people or perfect people because they don't need to be saved. He didn't come to start the Holy Rollers Club with the religious all-stars. He didn't come for the ones who have it all together, who got it all right. He only came for sinners. And so in another sense, Jesus obviously did come for everyone because everyone is a sinner. Everyone needs God's grace. The issue is that not everyone realizes it. So again, it's the people who admit their sin who will accept Jesus. It's those who know their need for grace who will receive it. And that's why Jesus spent time with those who were deemed furthest from God, and why he spoke harshly toward those who thought they were already close to God. Here's what this means for us. This means the only way to come to Jesus is just as you are. You don't have to clean yourself up. In fact, you can't clean yourself up. You just come as you are, and your sin and your brokenness and your guilt and your shame, you bring it all to Jesus. You just come as you are. But don't miss this next part. You don't stay as you are. That's why Jesus said he came to call sinners to do what? To love themselves or accept themselves or to be affirmed just as they are? No, he said he came to call sinners to repentance. See, Jesus loves you too much to leave you as you are in your sin. He loves you too much to let you go down the path you're on. So when you come to Jesus, he changes you into a new person. He has to. His love and his holiness demand it. That's why Levi didn't just add Jesus onto the side of his tax collecting job. He didn't just give Jesus his Sunday morning and keep on with his job and his sin Monday to Saturday. No, he left everything to follow Jesus. He repented and he left his sin behind. So you come to Jesus just as you are, but you don't stay as you are because he loves you too much to leave you as you are. And sadly, the Pharisees missed this. They taught the opposite, that you had to change before coming to God, that you had to perform the right rituals, say the right things. You had to clean yourself up first. Then you were worthy to come to God and be with him. And that's what led to this next interaction between Jesus and the Pharisees. Look at verses 33 to 35. And they said to him, the disciples of John fast often and offer prayers, and so the disciples of the Pharisees, but yours eat and drink. And Jesus said to them, can you make wedding guests fast while the bridegroom is with them? The days will come when the bridegroom is taken away from them, and then they will fast in those days. Fasting was one of the things the Pharisees taught could make you holy and worthy of coming to God. But it wasn't just fasting, it was fasting like them. Fasting was a major part of the Old Testament and Judaism. Jewish people fasted on the Day of Atonement and other declared holy days of the year. But the Pharisees, they were known for fasting twice a week, every week, on Mondays and Thursdays. And that was the standard they held up for everyone else if you want to be holy like us. We know Jesus and his disciples fasted. We saw Jesus fasted 40 days in the wilderness. But they didn't fast like the Pharisees fasted. So they weren't holy and right with God like them. So Jesus brings out another analogy. This one about a wedding. A wedding is a celebration. It's a time to feast, not to fast. And Jesus was the bridegroom. He's the key to the whole celebration. So it doesn't make sense to fast when he's there. Jesus is saying then that this isn't the time to fast. Fasting is to prepare yourself, to seek God's help. That's why the Jewish people fasted on days like the Day of Atonement. It was a way of expressing a longing for God. But Jesus was telling them, guys, the thing you're fasting about is right here. All your longing is fulfilled in me. So it's okay to fast, but it's also okay to eat and drink and celebrate. He says in verse 35, there'll be a time to fast later when Jesus is taken away. He's giving a hint here that he will eventually die. And after Jesus dies, then his followers will fast. And that's why we should practice the discipline of fasting today. Just as it was in the Old Testament, fasting is an expression of longing, saying that you desire God more than food. We fast and we pray and longing for Jesus, the bridegroom, to come back and make all things right again. And one day, our fasting will be over. The bridegroom will return, and we will celebrate and feast with him forever. So Jesus is trying to tell the Pharisees that they're misunderstanding the times and what Jesus has come to do. They are so focused on their rituals and traditions that they're missing the very thing they claim to be fasting for. So he gives them three more examples in these last verses, verses 36 to 39. He also told them a parable. No one tears a piece from a new garment and puts it on an old garment. If he does, he will tear the new, and the piece from the new will not match the old. And no one puts new wine into old wineskins. If he does, the new wine will burst the skins, and it will be spilled, and the skins will be destroyed. But new wine must be put into fresh wineskins. And no one after drinking old wine desires new, for he says, the old is good. You got three examples here making all the same point. First one is a garment. Think of a shirt. You got an old shirt with a hole in it. You don't go and tear up a new shirt to try and sew it onto the old one. Then the new shirt is ruined and the old one doesn't match. Second example is about wine, grape juice. Small joke. This is one that we need a little more context for. Wine, we know, is fermented grape juice. And the fermenting process would take place in a wineskin, which was literally animal skin. I know this sounds kind of gross, but they would take sheepskin or goat skin, take the hair off, sew it all together, and the neck part would be the top. You would pour the wine in, and as it fermented, it would expand. So why would you not put new wine in an old used wineskin? Well, because when it expands, it would tear and the wine would be ruined. Third example is drinking wine, or Welch's, of course. It's commonly known that old wine is better than new wine. It's had longer to ferment. So anyone who has old wine isn't going to want the new wine. That's simple. Those are the three examples. And when you take that and you put it all together, what we see is Jesus saying something really, really big about his ministry, and also something that was really, really offensive to these Jewish leaders. Jesus is the new patch and the new wine. And he's explaining that his ministry cannot be mixed with the old. And what's the old wine? Well, it's clearly whatever the Pharisees were practicing. And this wasn't just Judaism. Jesus didn't come to abolish the Old Testament faith. No, he said he came to fulfill it. He came as a faithful Jewish man who taught and obeyed the Jewish law in fulfillment of it. But he also wanted to make clear that he came to start something new. The gospel isn't just adding new wine to an old wineskin or a new patch on an old shirt. It's a new way entirely. He was saying that to try and earn God's favor with the law, especially all the man-made laws the Pharisees had, was to reject God. It was to miss out on all that the law in the Old Testament pointed to in the first place, which was Jesus. To remain Jewish and reject Jesus would be to ultimately reject God himself. And that's exactly what the Pharisees were doing. Jesus knew that. That's why he said they preferred this old wine. They didn't want anything new. They thought what they had was just fine. There are many reasons we could give that the Pharisees thought this way. They were hard-hearted. They were legalists. They were hypocrites. But here's what we can't miss. They were also comfortable. The Jewish people as a whole were comfortable in their religion. They had their temple, their sacrifices, their laws, their teachings. They had their traditions, what they were used to. And here's this guy doing things different, radically different. He's associating with people we don't associate with. He's teaching people we don't teach. He doesn't fast like we do. He doesn't worship like we do. And that made people uncomfortable. And guess what? Jesus still makes people uncomfortable today. Even some of us who claim to follow him. We may not wrestle today with the continuity or discontinuity of Judaism like the early church did. Like they had to figure out what to do with the old part of their life, with the temple and the food laws and all that. We don't have that Jewish heritage like they did. But we still gravitate toward comfort, even comfort religion. So let me close, real brief, showing you what that looks like for us and giving you two consequences of having a comfortable religion. Here's the first consequence, number one. Comfort causes us to miss who God is reaching. Pharisees and Jewish people were so focused on being holy themselves that they missed completely the people in need. They had their noses so high up in the clouds they couldn't see the people down below who needed their help. So they ignored and despised those who needed God the most, like Levi and his friends. And I fear we as Christians can do the same. It's true that we are called to be unstained by the world. It's true that bad company corrupts good morals. And it's true that we should be cautious about even the appearance of sin. But my friend, listen to me. That should not keep us from following Jesus' clear example of befriending people who are far from God. That means as a Christian, you should have lost friends. You should invite lost people into your home. And you should eat dinner with them at your table like Jesus. But what will people think about me? What if my kids are exposed to something bad? What if they say something inappropriate? Guys, we're not called to build a Christian bubble. We're not called to hide from the world. It's possible to keep yourself unstained while also befriending those who need Jesus. So if you want to follow Jesus, you need to eat dinner with the people Jesus ate dinner with. If Jesus were around today, who do you think he'd be spending time with? Who do you think would be the modern day equivalent of a tax collector or a prostitute, to those who were despised by the religious folks? Might it be criminals, addicts, LGBTQ advocates, racists? Who else? Are those the sorts of people we might see Jesus having dinner with today? If Jesus were on earth today, I think he would be canceled. And he would be canceled by Christians. Like, people on the internet would go crazy. Can you believe Jesus was having dinner with those people? Look, if you're not a little nervous about the people you spend time with, you aren't living like Jesus. If all your friends are just like you and have perfect little families like you and go to church like you, you aren't living like Jesus. If you want to be like Jesus, go befriend someone who wouldn't step foot in church. Invite them over for dinner. Sit across from them at your table and listen to their story. And maybe you'll find, like Jesus did, that they are the very ones most ready to receive him. Don't let comfort cause you to miss who God is reaching. Here's the second consequence of comfort. Religion. Number 2, comfort causes us to miss what God is doing. Tradition is not bad. We all have traditions, things we do over time that have meaning. We all have preferences. That's not a bad thing either. Even in church, we have a type of worship music, a style of preaching we prefer. That's not necessarily bad. But I do think it's important that we stop and consider our preferences every once in a while and ask ourselves why we prefer what we prefer. Is it because it's biblical, or is it because it's what's most comfortable? Is it because it glorifies God most, or is it because it's what we're used to? Look, I'm not advocating this morning for some radical change in our church. I just want to challenge you to think. I just want to unsettle you a little bit. Because it's been said that a church's last words before its death are, "This is the way we've always done it." Are there things we do just because it's the way we do it? Because it's tradition, it's comfortable, it doesn't upset too many people? What about you personally? Do you base your daily decisions, your schedule, your relationships on what's most comfortable and familiar to you, what's easiest? What if God's calling you to do something uncomfortable, something hard? Like start a new ministry or move to a new place or take a new job or reach a different group of people that everyone else is overlooking. Would you miss it simply because it doesn't fit in your comfortable life? It's been my experience that God does his greatest work on the other side of fear, on the outside of our comfort zones. So are you willing to get uncomfortable? Are you willing to follow Jesus wherever he calls? Even if it's not in your 10-year plan, even if it seems impossible, even if it comes with a cost. Will you be the Pharisee on the sideline saying, oh, we can't do that. We've always done it this way. Or will you be like Levi and leave everything to reach those around you? There's nothing wrong with a little comfort, so long as it doesn't cause you to miss who God is reaching and what God is doing. Would you bow your heads with me?